This is the Addendum to the Genes of Gregoria, Moscow, June 7th, 1996. The hospital room was much brighter than the rather dimly lit, gloomy hallway that led to it. The room itself obviously benefited from a recent renovation, and the many vases of fresh flowers brought an extra glow to the recently painted, rose-colored walls. Most of the flowers were brought by visitors coming to see David Truskoff, although some were brought for the two other patients in the room. I was still holding her hand and looking down into green eyes that were trying to smile. I apologized for not bringing flowers. I was told that in Russia one does not bring flowers to the hospital, I said. I remember telling Sasha that Nadine's laugh and smile always began with her eyes. But now, even though her mouth curled into a smile, her eyes remained almost lifeless and coated. I could tell that her condition was much more serious than I had been told. I insisted, she said. We all did. We love flowers, but as you can see, we have more than enough. I slid my hand from hers, and my mind filled with questions, but no words would come out. Nadine was quick to sense my dilemma. Sasha died in his sleep. It was only 1 week after we received your letter telling us of your planned visit. I am so sorry, David. I meant to write or call, but everything was so... She looked away and towards me again. Sasha started a letter to you. He didn't finish it. Gregoria has it. He wants to give it to you. The coating over her eyes began to expand into tears, and I took her hand again. With her other hand, she brushed back her hair, that now showed only a few streaks of the beautiful, original red in the thin gray strands that remained. Her radiation and chemo treatments had taken their toll. David, she continued, hesitating with each sentence. We buried him in his uniform, with all his ribbons. But the medals we sent to the museum in Minsk, to put next to Nikolaya's. Nadine paused and struggled to take a long breath. You would not have known him, she said, exhaling. He became so angry the last 2 months. I know, I did too, but not like him. My poor Sasha. We had nothing. Can you imagine my Sasha taking help from his children? I can't tell you how much the money you sent helped. There were times when the pension checks never came, and Sasha would get into arguments with Yeltsin supporters almost every day. We would call Yeltsin that dumb, drunken pig. Even on the metro, he would look at some of the young women with their tiny miniskirts, high heels, and stockings, and ask me in a loud voice, do they really think that that is attractive? That is the new Yeltsin Russian woman. Right up until the end, he would go to Arbat station and hand out Zhiganov leaflets. I begged him to stay home. Just a few months ago, he put on his uniform and marched in a communist demonstration. The tears now began to drop over the dark rings under her eyes, and I shook my head for her to stop, but she would not. You should have seen him, David. He was in pain, and he was marching and trying to shout with the others. The fascists cannot win. The fascists cannot win. The fascists cannot win. I cried, and at home I had to help him into the elevator and put him to bed. I scolded him for going. He shook his fists. Nadine, he shouted at me. They are throwing us away like a pile of garbage. Did so many of my young comrades give their lives so a few Russians could get rich? No, Nadine. They died so socialism could be given a chance. It never had a chance. He used to say that all the time. We fought a war, and then the Cold War, and the arms race, and the corruption that it fostered, and we never got a chance to try what it was that we fought for. She pulled her hand from mine and wiped both of her eyes. This time her eyes joined the smile as she turned her head to greet the large figure in the doorway. Even though I had never met him, I knew immediately who he was. There was the same shock of hair over his forehead, the same square shoulders and graceful walk. When he smiled, I could see his father's face smiling and waving to me at the airport the last time I had visited. This was Nikolaya Alexandrovich, Sasha and Nadine's son. He hugged his mother and turned to shake my hand. I started to explain who I was, but he interrupted me. I know, he said in a voice just like his father's. I knew you were here, and I have seen your pictures. I remained silent as they talked of family things. I heard him say that Luba's condition was deteriorating, and that she was bedridden in the rest home that she was staying at. Gregoria was planning to visit again that day, and Ludmila and her children would also be along soon. Sasha, her 3 boys, and husband would come later. I felt rather awkward standing there. The room was getting crowded. The patient next to Nadine also had visitors. I suggested that I leave and come back again tomorrow. No, Nadine said. You have met Ludmila and Sarah and their families, but you have never met my 2 sons. Sasha's 2 sons. Stay, Gregoria wants to meet you. Nikolaya heaved a deep sigh and nodded his head at his mother. Don't worry, she smiled at him. We will not talk about politics. I stayed until the entire family arrived. When I left, I promised we would see each other again. We met at Ludmila's apartment in the Katsioke section of Moscow, not far from the Central Republican Clinical Hospital. The attractive middle-aged Ludmila, who had a habit of pushing back her long reddish-brown hair with her middle finger so it hung in back of her ears, frequently shook her head in frustration as the English words would not come to her fast enough. Gregoria had the same problem, but Nikolaya spoke French, English, and Russian, and often used words from each to make a point. Sarah lamented the fact that her 3 sons were not there to speak for her. They all did well in their English studies at school. In an American home, it may have been a rather uncomfortable luncheon, but in Russia, loud political arguments at the kitchen table are as normal as the fish one may be served for breakfast. Nikolaya, his suit coat draped over a chair, his tie stuffed inside his expensive shirt, would often smile condescendingly and nod at me. While we were having a second cup of coffee, he said, Look at them. What are they complaining about? My intelligent sister has this lovely apartment in the best section of Moscow. Her 2 sons are preparing for secondary school. She has a good life. She can go down to the supermarket and buy anything that anyone else in the world can buy. She could not do that under communism. The stores were empty. They have forgotten that. Niet, shouted Gregoria, filling the room with a torrent of Russian words, then stopping abruptly. He turned to face me. I have not forgotten, he said, choosing each English word and humming at the end of sentences to give himself time to find the right ones. I have not forgotten, nor have I ever been able to find the answer as to why that happened. I often asked my father that question. I know we were under an embargo. I know that we were not importing consumer goods. But food, what happened to our food? Did our farms dry up? Did Brezhnev's remaining mafia reroute all of the food? Gorbachev called it economic sabotage designed to destroy the Union, but he never identified who was behind that sabotage. David, do we throw away our system and our dreams because of the corruption of a few officials? Did you do that after Watergate? Under Zyuganov's plan, we can vote such people out. We need not fear 18 years of stagnation because of a man like Brezhnev, who never had an original thought in his life. My father often compared Yeltsin to Brezhnev. They are not rulers, only figureheads, doing what they are told. The question is, who is doing the telling? We have to clean that Kremlin rat's nest out, once and for all. Gregoria was a long way from finished, but the beeper attached to his brother's belt interrupted him. Nikolaya reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the cell phone, and excused himself. He walked into one of the small bedrooms to make his calls. In her slow, steady, staccato English, Ludmila, never taking her eyes away from the hall that held the muffled sounds of her older brother's telephone conversation, tried to pacify her younger brother. Nikolaya is from another world. All those years in Paris have erased Moscow. Moscow is a bad thought for him. It is a place where they turn off the hot water in the summertime. Drunks and beggars roam the streets in the city. Your car is never safe from thieves, and neither are you. He is building his new lovely home outside of the city, where he expects to escape from all of that. There he can continue to live in his own world. After all, he is now the assistant president of a major bank, and soon he will be president. How can he see things as we do? She turned to face me, as though she expected me to answer her question. I shook my head, and she continued. When I heard Prime Minister Valentin Pavlov say, a few years ago, that Western banks were conspiring to destabilize the ruble, my heart sank. I wondered if my brother's Parisian bank was involved. He knows that I was given this apartment. He also knows that I earn, as a teacher, $80 a month. My husband, now a police captain, is supposed to get $90 a month, but many times he is not paid at all. The prices in the supermarkets are not what I can afford. I buy from the street like most of my neighbors. I wear the same clothes for years. Nikolai and his wife help the children and me. They help their parents. But they cannot help all of Russia. Nothing will change under Yeltsin. It will only get worse for millions like us. And remember how much better off we are than so many of the people in the villages who have nothing. Not even food for their children. I cannot afford to take my children to a doctor or a dentist. My parents are without a ruble to their name. She stopped suddenly as Nikolaya re-entered the room. It was just as well, because I could see the tears begin to well in her eyes. So tell us what is happening in the world money market, Gregoria said sarcastically. Nikolaya smiled at me. He mocks me, my very bright, handsome brother, who could do anything, or be anyone that he wants to be. Look at him. He is so handsome, my little brother, that I used to call Malkchek, until he went to fight in Afghanistan. Oh, he was the most beautiful soldier. When he walked down the street, women, young and old, would smile at him. Yet he is still not married. He never knows where his next ruble is going to come from, because the space work in which he was involved is no longer being funded. With his education, he could be a success in my business, but he refuses. He is like the Christians and the Muslims and all religionists who are brainwashed in childhood. He does not understand that there is no such thing as genetic communists. As the oldest child, I was very close to my parents and my grandparents, but this is 1996. My brother asks the questions of why the stores were empty. He forgets the egomaniac economists, all presenting their ideas of how the country's economy should function. Free market, controlled market, semi-controlled market, and none of them had it right. He forgets the egomaniac politicians, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, Pavlov, the so-called New Left, and the old battered communist right, all presenting ideas of whether we should be a federation, a hapless group of separate states, or perhaps the 51st American state. States and ethnic groups were demanding autonomy. Who could blame them? Who wanted to be part of all that craziness? How can the market perform under those conditions? It did not, and I can easily understand why. Sarah, who said little because of her lack of English, suddenly shouted to her brother Gregoria to translate. I try to teach children gymnastics, but they come to me pale and emaciated from lack of proper diet. How can I teach them? Yeltsin is fat and full of vodka. Does he care? There was a moment of silence, and the Milla began to pick up the empty cups. My family, said Nikolaya in a much softer tone, and with a smile. It is very dear to me. I love them all very much. Now, like all of Russia, we are divided. Yes, I will vote for Yeltsin. I despise the man. He embodies everything I dislike in a human being. But I shall protect what I have. I will not see the nationalizations of the banks or the centralization of a controlled economy. I am in a position now to help all of my family, my wife, my children, and all of my beloved relatives. I shall not give that up. The park was filling up slowly. We never expected these things to begin on time, explained my interpreter. She was a young woman in her late 20s or early 30s who tried to explain her rather complicated political strategy while we waited for the communist demonstration to start. My husband and I have decided that the first round of the elections we shall vote for Gorbachev. Gorbachev? I shouted incredulously. Why Gorbachev? Well, she said, stumbling over her English that she admitted she hadn't used in a while. We feel that Gorbachev's ideas in the beginning were good ones. He was a terrible politician, unable to convey those ideas to the people. He tried to run a government by consensus, when what the Union needed was a strong leader who could show commitment to a singular cause. He reached into the snake pit and asked the West for help. He was finally bitten. He was fatally bitten. That killed him. It was not the thing for a man who still tried to call himself a communist to do. End the Cold War, yes. End the arms race, yes. End the fear of nuclear holocaust, yes. But do it with dignity. That was what killed him. He left the Russian people with no dignity at all. He appeared to us as a man groveling to the West. The Western-oriented and Western-directed economist bent all of his ideas until he was neither here nor there. My husband and I feel that because the first round of votes on the 16th will only lead to another round of votes, we wish to make a statement that his original ideas were good ones. In the second round, we will both vote for the communist, Zhigniew. What if Zhigniew fails by 2 votes? I asked with a smile. Oh, she returned my smile. There is no chance of that. While we chatted, workers handed out newspapers, leaflets, and pictures of various candidates. There is no chance of that. While we chatted, workers handed out newspapers, leaflets, and pictures of various candidates besieging us. Most of the material was, of course, from the communists. As the march began to form in the street in front of the park, I spotted an old friend that Sasha had introduced me to, Igor Ivanovich. I yelled, walking towards him. He turned and hugged me. I went to see Nadine, he said. She told me that you were here. I am sorry that you did not get to see Sasha. He was a great man. He was my lifelong friend. There are many who will miss him. There was a long procession at his funeral. I am afraid we will be having another soon. Not knowing how to respond, I changed the subject. Tell me, Igor, what can happen here? I understand that you do not have the mayor's permission for this march. Will there be a confrontation? I don't think so. You see, the mayor only does what Yeltsin tells him to do. It all depends on how many cups of vodka Yeltsin has had for breakfast. 1 makes him angry, 2 makes him crazy, and 3 puts him back to bed. We hoped that it was 3 this morning. He laughed, slapping me on the shoulder, and went back to join his comrades, taking their position for the march. My interpreter and I walked down to the corner, where we knew the march would turn into a wide street, and at the end of it, a square. There, speeches would be given. We decided that the corner was the best place to take pictures. Our decision proved to be correct. I heard the marchers singing well before I saw them. A 12-year-old boy led them. I assumed that was done to dispel the often repeated media description of every communist demonstration as mostly older people. I must admit that I myself was surprised at the large amount of younger demonstrators. My thoughts went immediately to Nadine's description of my cousin Sasha as I heard the chant, "We will never give up, we will never give up," followed by another chant, "The fascists will not win, the fascists will not win." I was holding my emotions in check until a group of women, in what appeared to be traditional Belarusian costumes, saw my tape recorder and began to sing the World War II song that my mother's singing group in the Russian National Home always ended their programs with. I confessed to my tears. "No, no, no," they sang in precious harmony. "There is nothing as beautiful as Russia." I am an American, and proud to be one, but the pride on my mother's face when she sang that song always reminded me of my heritage. In Ludmila's kitchen, I failed to notice how much Sasha's 2 sons looked alike. Perhaps it was because the extroverted and older Nikolaya dominated the conversation. He was always the confident, financially successful, worldly businessman, while Gregoria and Ludmila were much more subdued. As members of the Truskoff family rounded the corner, carrying red flags and smiling, Ludmila's 2 daughters were, at that moment, trying to shout slogans louder than their mother and Sarah's 3 sons. I was struck by the fact that Gregoria's walk and smile were his father's walk and smile. Ludmila's features and bearings were that of Nadine. Even her red hair was the same color as her mother's. The reflection of the bright sun off the red flag she carried accented it. Sarah's mannerisms, large glasses, and smile brought visions of a young Nadine. They all spotted me at almost the same time that I saw them, and Gregoria waved for me to join them in the march. I laughed and shook my head. My eyes were still a little blurry, and so I was so emotionally absorbed after this serenade by the Belarusian singers that I forgot to reload my camera and missed the great picture of Sasha and Nadine's children and grandchildren, the Genes of Gregoria. I raced ahead to get in front of the marchers once again, and noticed that my interpreter was swept into the fervor and was singing loudly. "Are you going to still use your first vote for Gorbachev?" I shouted. "Maybe," she laughed. I listened to the speeches and took notes while my interpreter translated, but I couldn't take my eyes off Sasha's family members. It was amazing, I thought, how the physical features were passed down. I could see my own father in Gregoria's face, and how much he looked like my father's brother, Nikolaya, whose picture was on John Truskoff's bedroom dresser. At that moment, I could see my grandfather on the farm in Plotnica. When the speeches ended, I didn't want to leave. I had just a short time to get to the auditorium near the university to hear Zhiganov's lecture, but the family was not going, and I knew that I might not see them again. I felt that I was walking out in the middle of a great movie. I hugged them all and tried to keep my emotions from exploding when I told them I would make sure to see Nadine again before I had to leave for home. I watched them disappear into the metro and made my own way to the other side of the station to get my train to the university. I got another glimpse of them because all the trains were delayed again while the armed soldiers searched under the seats for explosives. Flying over the Gulf of Finland, June 14th, 1996. There isn't much that one can see below when you are 35,000 feet in the air, but I stared out of the aircraft window anyway. It was a simple tactic to avoid conversation with the retired schoolteacher in the seat next to mine. She was a very nice person, but I wanted to keep my mental pictures of the past 2 weeks sharp. The day before I left Moscow, I went back to visit Nadine, only to find the entire family gathered inside the main entrance. Nadine had slipped into a coma the night before. Nikolaya's beautiful French wife and Ludmila's police captain were there with the children. I could see that both Ludmila and Sarah had been crying. I hugged each of them and shook hands with the others and said my goodbye quickly. At the door, I heard Gregoria calling to me. I turned, but he indicated that I should keep walking through the door and onto the concrete landing at the top of the entranceway stairs. He reached into his raincoat pocket and, trying to keep the rain blowing onto the landing from reaching the envelope that he pulled out, he thrust it at me and looked directly into my eyes. I was supposed to give this to you at the demonstration, but I forgot. I was going to take it over to you where you were staying, but this happened. I planned to mail it to you, but here you are. It is from my father. I know that he would want you to have it. I took the envelope, promised to write, apologized for not being able to stay, stumbled over some words of sympathy, and left. On the day of my flight, the prognosis for Nadine was for days, if not hours. How tragic. Those two wonderful people who led such important, productive, and giving lives, taken away from their family within a month of each other. I remembered what Sasha said about the passing of Natasha on the farm. Her world was intact, he said. The world Sasha and Nadine left was a depressing, divided, tense land. Their Russia had no real direction, no common cause, no pride, no dignity. All their lives, Nadine and Sasha were winners. They won the great patriotic war. They continued to win political battles. They went out feeling like losers. It was so damn unfair. With the destruction of the ruble, their life savings was gone. They had to sell their car. Their pension checks often did not come. Ludmila told me how angry Nadine became one day because they came off the metro to see one of their neighbors and longtime friends standing at the entrance trying to sell household belongings to get money for food. I also remembered the words of Luba at her mother's funeral. Can't you just feel the history? She said. Yes, I thought. Once again, yesterday's history is today. Maybe they were both fortunate not to have to relive it. The cocktail table was going down the aisle of the 747, and my thoughts were interrupted by a poke from the woman seated next to me. Do you want a drink? She asked. I asked for a Sprite and tried to reassemble my thoughts, but the woman was still talking. I waited until she began to down her vodka cocktail and then created a surefire way to avoid conversation and get back to the Truskoff family. I took Sasha's unfinished letter from my pocket and slowly began to read it. Dear Cousin David, Nadine and I want to thank you for your help. We know that the money was coming from you, although you found a way to send it anonymously through the bank. We also believe that it was our friend Igor Alexandrovich that wrote to you about our difficulty. I would have returned the money, but Nadine was very uncomfortable and needed care. Thank you. You know that we both love to have you visit, to exchange thoughts and ideas, and to feel the compassion and commitment to a better world that my cousin always conveys. You are more than welcome, but you must know that our abilities to act as hosts are very limited. It pains both of us to think that you would be staying at one of those hotels in Moscow with their casinos and brazen prostitution. I know that you will be busy at the university and with your research, but I hope we can spend some enjoyable time together. David, as you may know, my son Nikolai and I have much different views about politics in Russia. I tried to explain to him that the reason I hate capitalism so much is because I not only do not believe that it is an applicable economic structure for Russia, but it is an unethical philosophy to begin with. When the gap between the rich and the poor widens, as it must, because greed feeds on greed, entire nations lose their civility. Moral breakdowns occur. Children are taught that avarice and violence are the norm. There is no common cause. That has happened in your country and in mine, and it will take generations to correct it. That is, if a great leader ever comes forward to lead the people out of the degrading baseness and restore the sense of national purpose. I remember you saying that it takes good government to make good people be good people, but it takes good people to make good government, so the battle is really in the schools. There we have to try and develop great leaders. Maybe Ludmilla will be able to tell you about the way the Yeltsin gang has already changed our textbook and bent our history to suit their agenda. What is a great leader? We often say a person with vision and courage, but it has to be more than that. The people must sense his honesty and love for them. In your writings, you have often expressed the love you and your family had for Roosevelt. He was a great man because he faced down greed. He received the worst punishment the conservative leaders and the media could hand out, but in the face of that, he had the courage to force change. He saved the system that he believed in. He was striving for a system of humane capitalism. Look at us, David. From an economist's point of view, we are neither socialist nor capitalist. We have a mongrel economy fostered by jackals, who at this moment are seeking each other's jugular. I know that Yeltsin will win the runoff election. I also know that the jackals will no longer have any need for the pitiful, sick old drunk. They will soon be rid of him, and Russia will again be plunged into chaos. I must live. I must fight. We have to get Russia back on the course of Lenin's vision. That was an evolving dictatorship of the proletariat. I see it as a socialist democracy. I told Nadine yesterday that we will both be around to see it happen. When the jackals eat each other, a new, truly democratic Russia will emerge. David, I wish to say more about plans for your visit, but Nadine needs me now. I will finish this later. That is the end. Thank you all very much.